So the EON is probably one of the very first guns that you're going to find. And it is a very basic gun that functions very basically. This feels very, very similar and functions very, very similar to the 10mm pistol that is in Fallout 4. I'm pretty sure they directly modeled it off of Fallout 4's 10mm, and they reused some of the animations for it, which is fine. I mean, it makes sense. You might as well keep it in the game if you have the animations for that, and they did change it up a little bit, especially with mods, so that does help. For base stats, the EON does 17 damage per shot, which is okay. It's nothing incredible, but it's alright. It's actually honestly pretty decent at the start, because you do want to get the most out of each of your shots in this, and the only other gun that you're going to be finding that's 7.77 right away is going to be something like the Grendel, which if you turn the Grendel to semi-auto, then they're very comparable, but most of the time the Grendels are full auto. So the EON works as like a semi-auto version of that. Plus it's a handgun, so you can also spec into handguns a little bit early on, which is kind of nice. This holds 12 rounds in it, so it's okay for a pistol. It has a decent rate of fire, it has a decent reload speed, it has okay sights, it has 20 meters of range, which is okay as well. About what you'd expect for a pistol. So for pros for this gun, I would say that it has a common round. The gun itself is super common. It's lightweight, which is good. It has okay range for when you would be using it. You're going to be using a pistol indoors. Doesn't have very much recoil, and the damage is okay at the very start. The cons to this are that the damage does fall off later on. It still actually has okay damage, but it's not as strong as other 7.77 guns. Rate of fire could be a bit better. It feels sometimes a little bit sluggish. And one of the major cons to this weapon is that you cannot get an advanced version of the EON. It is stuck at the refined. So this only goes up to a tier 3 weapon, which is a major disadvantage because every tier that you go up, the more damage you're going to get. So if you're not going up those tiers, you're going to have less damage, which does make it so you can get like a refined EON fairly early on. It's not super difficult to find these in the very early game, but it's never going to get any real better than that, and aside from just getting a legendary effects on it that help it out. And it's kind of strange. I don't know why this weapon and a couple others don't go up to an advanced version. It just seems odd. It is okay, but it's not fantastic because it is competing with other weapons that also shoot the 7.77. Technically, it is the only pistol that fires that though, so if you are going with a handguns only build, this will probably be a gun that you hang on to for quite a while because it doesn't weigh anything and the bullets are super cheap and super common. So at the very least, you're just going to use it for clearing up small things or weak enemies, which it's okay for doing that. Recently with my handgun tier list, I put the EON into C tier and I would probably keep it in the C tier. It's an okay gun that does everything alright, but isn't really a standout. Let's talk about the modded version and where I would put that. For optics, we have two options, either glow sights or reflex sights. It already has glow sights on it by default. Both of these are fine, pick whichever one you would like. I don't really care for the reflex sight on this one, although I don't really care for the glow sights on this one either. So it's kind of a toss-up for me. I've just been sticking with the glow sights and they're fine enough for me. Then for a muzzle, I would recommend that you put a suppressor on this. If you have the sneak skill, you're just going to get more damage out of having that on it. If you don't have that and you don't really care about it, either the muzzle brake or the compensator would be a fine addition too. Just pick whichever one you would like. For the magazine, you have a couple options here, and I would recommend one of two of them. I would recommend either the white hot rounds or the explosive rounds. I decided to go with explosive rounds in mine, and this does pretty good damage per second, and it can splash damage to nearby enemies, which is nice. White hot rounds will get you fire damage and deal damage over time to enemies, which can also be pretty good, especially against high health enemies that don't necessarily have armor. The other magazines I really wouldn't recommend going for. Like, it would be really cool if you could have the drum magazine on this plus white hot rounds or explosive rounds and have the binary trigger, but unfortunately you can't. So if you want white hot rounds or the explosive rounds, you're just stuck at a 12 mag size, which is okay enough for a handgun, but I do wish it could be a little bit larger. For a laser, I'd recommend you just put the recon laser on there. It's the better of the two lasers, and this gun gets access to it, so that helps. For internals, you either have a hair trigger or high velocity. I decided to go with high velocity, although hair trigger is perfectly fine too. Hair trigger increases your rate of fire. You probably won't need that because you can run through ammo with this pretty fast already. High velocity helps a little bit. It gives you a little bit longer range, so that's why I took it. Range is kind of useful to have, but you're still probably not going to be using this at super long range. And then for a receiver, I would recommend the semi-auto, especially if you're using white hot rounds or explosive rounds, because this doesn't actually nerf your damage and you get the most damage per shot out of this. You could go with the binary trigger or the burst fire option too, but this will nerf your damage, but your DPS can go up. And this is kind of why I wish you could have like a drum magazine on this. If you could have a drum mag and you could have burst fire on this or a full auto version of this and white hot rounds, this one would probably actually be a pretty good little submachine gun. but as it stands, it's kind of an awkward pistol that's doesn't really fit anywhere. So I would actually say the modded version goes down a tier. Not necessarily because it's worse than the base version, but compared to other weapons, once they're fully maxed out, this one is probably one of the weaker weapons, and I'd put this actually in D tier, which is kind of sad that the fully upgraded version of this just doesn't do very much. Now, that's not to say it's unusable or anything, because it does shoot a super common round, so if you have it and you're going to the pistol build, you might as well use it. But there's a lot of other weapons that also shoot the 7.77, so that hurts it. The most damage I was able to get out of this was 93 damage. That was without the suppressor, although I don't think it counts the suppressor towards damage. And once I did have it on there, then it was 91 damage. This was okay, but it wasn't anything spectacular, especially since we just talked about the Grendel not too long ago, and the Grendel is also not one of the best options to be firing the 7.7 in my opinion. I think the Beowulf, the Kodama, and the Microgun are all better options for it. And this one is probably the weakest option, unless, again, you are just going with a dedicated pistol build. Now let's talk about the unique version of the EON, which is called the Radburn. The Radburn is a unique pistol that you get during a quest. You just have to grab it, and I actually missed it during the quest, so I don't have any footage of it, sadly. But this one does have a unique modification on it, where this one has radioactive rounds in it, so you can deal radiation damage to enemies, which is nice. That's actually a pretty decent upgrade. And it does have quite a few mods on it, which makes it a pretty good early game weapon, because you can get this very, very early on if you want to join the UC Vanguard. This one comes with a compensator, white hot rounds, and a binary trigger on it. So this can work kind of as a fast firing burst pistol that also does fire damage and can do radioactive damage onto enemies. And that's actually not too bad. If you grab this one pretty early on, it will probably last you a decent amount of time. That is not a bad effect to have, and you don't even need to buy this either, so you don't need to fork up your extra credits. That's good. You can spend it on other things. You can spend it on ammo, you can spend it on meds, you can spend it on ship parts, whatever you might need. So that brings us to, should you use the EON pistol? And I would say probably not, at least once you get going. If it's one of the few weapons that you find early on, then absolutely. It's a pretty good early game weapon. And if you're doing a dedicated pistol only build, then yeah, sure. I don't see why you wouldn't want to have an EON on your person, because it doesn't weigh anything. It clears up small enemies pretty well, and it shoots a super common round. It's the only pistol that does that. So in that build, yeah, sure, you might as well take it around with you. I don't think it's going to be one of your standout weapons that you got, unless you just get a legendary one that has all sorts of crazy effects on it, in which case, sure, then maybe. But if you're using just all weapons in the game, I would say that there's better weapons to shoot the same round. The Grendel is probably stronger than this. The Kodama, the Beowulf, and the Microgun, I would say, are all definitely stronger than this. So you do have stiff competition there for the same ammunition. And those will be my thoughts on the EON. It's an interesting pistol that I wish was a little bit better, and I wish it had an advanced version. I think that would make it truly decent, as well as maybe giving it some other mods that make it stand out a little bit more from the handguns or from other guns. But as it stands, it's an okay enough gun. Thank you guys so very much for watching this. Tell me your thoughts on the EON down in the comments below. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will talk to you guys next time. Bye-bye, everybody.